Few people wonder what happens to an elderly person's soul after death, especially after a year has passed since their departure. Time continues its course in the world of the living, but does it pass in the same way for those who have already crossed the threshold of life? Dolores Cannon, a researcher who dedicated decades to regression and exploring consciousness, brought curious revelations about this post-mortem moment. According to her, there is a kind of gradual awakening that occurs in the following months, something that cannot be measured by earthly clocks or calendars. For many seniors who pass away after a lifetime of ingrained bonds and habits, this process involves a kind of deep emotional review, and it is precisely upon completing a year that the soul begins to clearly recognize the meaning of its journey. Many believe that when you die, everything ends as if someone turned off a light. But that's not how consciousness works, especially in Dolores's view. According to her studies with thousands of cases in deep hypnosis, the spirit not only remains conscious, but begins to feel differently. It's as if, little by little, the soul begins to perceive itself in a broader way, with less attachment and more understanding. A year after death, the emotion that predominates for many seniors is a feeling of relief mixed with lucidity. This clarity, according to Dolores, is not immediate. It matures over time, just as the soul readjusts to a new reality. And if this topic makes you reflect, feel free to like and subscribe. This helps the channel continue to bring content that respects your sensitivity and your pace. In the beginning, the soul is still very connected to earthly life. Dolores describes this phase as a period in which the spirit observes events, feels the pain of farewells, but doesn't yet fully understand what it is experiencing. This silent observation lasts weeks or months, varying according to each person's story. But as time goes on, something changes. The soul begins to distance itself from material worries, fears, and demands that it carried in life. For many seniors, this detachment is accompanied by a kind of tranquility that slowly but steadily sets in. What once caused pain or regret gradually loses its strength. Spiritual time, unlike ours, allows the soul to look back without the weight of guilt, only with understanding. This understanding is one of the most striking points of the experiences reported by Dolores. Upon completing 1 year since death, the elderly person's soul begins to understand the whys that previously seemed unanswerable, why they made certain decisions, why they faced certain sufferings, why they failed to do so many things. This understanding doesn't come in the form of judgment, but of acceptance. Dolores explains that at this point, the predominant emotion is not sadness, but a kind of serenity that arises from recognition. The soul realizes that everything had a reason, even if it wasn't clear during life, and it is this lucidity that prepares the spirit to move forward on its journey, without fear, without attachment, only with the lightness of someone who has understood. Another curious aspect revealed in Dolores's accounts is that many elderly souls feel great gratitude after this first spiritual cycle. Gratitude for the life they had, for the bonds they built, for the experiences lived. Even those who went through difficult times, through losses, through loneliness, managed to see the value of what was lived. It's as if, upon leaving the stage of life, the soul begins to see everything from the outside, like a complete picture. And when contemplating this picture, even with its flaws and shadows, the feeling is of recognition and not of frustration. Life, with all its ups and downs, comes to be seen as a precious learning experience, and not as a burden. This process, according to Dolores, happens more often in souls who lived with some form of awareness or reflection. It is not necessary to have followed a religion or practiced meditation. What really matters is the degree of honesty with which one lived, the way one dealt with one's own mistakes and successes. The soul of an elderly person who tried to be fair, even without perfection, tends to go through this first year with less resistance. The emotion that arises at this point is similar to the one we feel when finishing an important book. It doesn't matter if everything was good or bad, but that it was lived with truth. And it is this truth that allows the soul to feel, after a year, a peace that no longer depends on the body. Dolores Cannon also observed that, at this point in the journey, the elderly person's soul begins to release emotional bonds that still remained. Ties with objects, places, and even unfulfilled promises lose importance. The The soul doesn't forget, but begins to look at everything with more distance and less attachment. This emotional change is essential for the spirit to proceed. A year after passing, many deceased seniors realize that the time of the living no longer belongs to them. There is a feeling that the world goes on, people go on, and this doesn't generate pain, but acceptance. Pain gives way to contemplation. It's as if the soul recognizes the role it played, and at the same time accepts that now its presence takes place in another way, more subtle and silent. In this phase, it is common for the soul to visit old memories that previously seemed forgotten. Dolores reports that the spirit begins to revisit episodes of youth, childhood, simple moments that gain new value. A coffee with someone dear, a conversation on the porch, a song that marked a period. Everything comes back to the surface not as regret, but as celebration. The predominant emotion at this moment is a mixture of tenderness and gratitude. The soul doesn't seek to relive, but to give thanks. It's as if it were making an effective inventory of everything that happened, recognizing the beauty of simple things. And this gratitude, according to Dolores, strengthens the soul, making it lighter, more ready to continue its evolution in dimensions that it doesn't yet fully know. This emotional transition is also marked by the perception that many feelings that seemed grand in life lose strength after death. Envy, anger, old grievances, resentments with family members or friends gradually dissolve. The soul, realizing that these emotions are no longer useful, begins to release them. Dolores describes this as a process of emotional decompression. Everything that was stored, contained, or ignored gradually releases. And in this emptying, a new sensation arises: lightness. The lightness of someone who no longer needs to protect or justify themselves. The soul of the elderly person then begins to feel a type of freedom that they didn't experience in life. An inner freedom that doesn't require explanations or approvals. Upon completing 1 year since passing, this lightness begins to combine with a broader form of perception. Dolores explains that the soul begins to feel not only for itself, but also for others. It's as if it develops a deeper empathy, as if it can understand pains that previously seemed distant. Many spirits report that they begin to feel affection for people with whom they had conflicts, and even compassion for those who hurt them. This doesn't mean forgetting, but understanding. Consciousness expands to the point of dissolving the boundaries between the self and the other. The emotion that arises is of union, not in the physical sense, but of belonging to the whole. The soul understands that it is part of something bigger and that its pains were not unique. Dolores Cannon also identified that, after this period, the soul begins to prepare for new paths. There is no rush. Spiritual time doesn't work like ours, but there is a recognition that the cycle has closed. The spirit then begins to receive internal guidance that indicates the next step. This can vary greatly, but in general involves learning, collaboration, or simply rest. The emotion that predominates at this stage is a mixture of serenity with anticipation. It's like someone who has finished a long journey and is now resting, but knows that at some point they will continue to another destination. There is no fear, only quiet curiosity. The soul feels embraced by a greater intelligence, which guides it without imposing. At this point in the journey, many seniors feel something that Dolores called reverence for life. It's a silent but very deep feeling. The soul looks back and realizes that, despite the flaws, every moment had value. Every gesture of kindness, every effort, every forgiveness, everything contributed to its evolution. This is not about vainglory or vanity, but recognition. The emotion that arises from this is a type of humble pride, knowing that they tried, that they lived, that they were part of the world. This reverence also extends to others. The soul begins to look with respect at all those who are still living their own journey on earth. It's as if it said in silence, "I understand you and I'm rooting for every step you're still going to take." Even with all this emotional and spiritual evolution, Dolores Cannon emphasizes that an elderly person's soul, after a year of passing, doesn't lose its individuality. It continues to be who it is, only without the limitations of the physical body. This means that its traits, its way of feeling, Its deepest preferences still exist, but in a more subtle way. The personality doesn't disappear, it just expands. Many souls continue to care about their families, observing their lives, rooting for them, but without interfering. There is an understanding that each one needs to live their own learnings. The emotion that accompanies this moment is that of a mature love, one that doesn't demand constant presence, but that expresses itself in silent care and respect for the other's paths. There is also a curious phenomenon described by Dolores in her accounts. Some elderly souls, upon completing a year in the spiritual plane, feel a stronger connection with other similar spirits. This is not about immediate reunions with family members, but about an identification with souls who have gone through similar experiences. This creates a sense of spiritual community. It's as if, even outside of Earth, the soul continues to be part of a group that shares common purposes or learnings. This feeling of belonging generates an emotion of comfort and continuity. The soul understands that it is not alone and that its journey is part of a larger network of evolving consciousnesses. This brings security and reinforces the value of its past existence. Over time, this connection with other souls also helps the spirit to better assimilate what it has lived. Dolores describes this phase as a period of silent exchange, where the soul learns by listening to what others have already experienced and at the same time offers its own experiences as a form of contribution. This sharing doesn't happen with words, but through a more subtle communication, made of impressions, feelings, and instantaneous understandings. The predominant emotion here is of reciprocity. There is no dispute, no comparison. Each soul is valued for what it has lived, and the simple act of being there already has value. The spirit of the elderly person feels that, even after death, it still has something to offer and something to learn, and this renews its motivation to continue. Another essential point highlighted by Dolores Cannon is that at this stage, the soul begins to lose its fear of the next stage. Many seniors who were afraid of death while they were alive discover after this first spiritual cycle that the unknown is not threatening. On the contrary, it begins to be seen as an open field of possibilities. This perception transforms the emotion of fear into curiosity. The soul no longer clings to the past, but also doesn't rush into the future. It learns to be in the now of the spiritual plane. This serene presence in the present brings a peace very different from the one sought on earth. It's not absence of problems, but absence of urgency. The soul understands that everything happens at the right time, and this deeply alleviates its consciousness. As the spirit stabilizes emotionally, it also becomes more sensitive to the presence of other dimensions. Dolores explains that many report more subtle perceptions, such as colors, sounds, and shapes that don't exist in the physical plane. These perceptions are not illusions, but forms of reality compatible with the soul's new state. This brings an emotion difficult to translate into words, but that approach is enchantment. The soul of the elderly person feels that it is being introduced to a richer reality, where everything has meaning, even without logical explanations. This expansion of perception also strengthens confidence. The spirit understands that there is a greater purpose in everything, and that nothing was in vain. Even the pains of the past begin to have a place of honor in this new scenario. Dolores also emphasizes that at this point, the soul begins to receive small internal invitations to engage in new forms of learning. It may be through subtle missions, such as accompanying future incarnations of loved ones, or simply participating in spiritual guidance processes. The soul is not obligated to anything, but feels like collaborating. The emotion that appears here is of purpose. Consciousness no longer feels that it is adrift, but that it is part of a living, intelligent flow. This brings vigor, even without a physical body. The spirit rediscovers a way to serve, to contribute, to continue growing. And in this cycle that renews itself, the soul of the elderly person understands that death is not the end, but just another season on the path of its existence. Throughout this first year in the spiritual plane, the soul of the elderly person goes through transformations that it would never imagine in life. Dolores Cannon states that this time is a kind of spiritual gestation, where the spirit adjusts to its new reality until it is ready for new steps. In this process, everything that was weight is left behind. Limiting beliefs, resentments, fears, and even some illusions that marked life are dissolved naturally. And what remains is a cleaner, more centered and more serene version of the soul. The emotion that settles in at this moment is that of completeness. The spirit feels that nothing is missing, that it is whole, even having left the physical body. This feeling of being complete brings a deep peace that is difficult to describe. This peace doesn't mean absence of memories, but a new way of relating to them. The soul still remembers who it was, the faces, the voices, the details of life. But now these memories don't cause longing or pain, but gratitude. Dolores reports that many spirits say that life, even with all that it brought of challenging, was a gift. Not for the happy moments only, but for the simple fact of having existed. This gratitude becomes one of the most present emotions at this stage. The soul realizes that being incarnated was a rare and valuable opportunity, and this feeling completely transforms the spirit's view of its previous existence. There is no longer the desire to return, but to honor what was lived with awareness and respect. By recognizing the value of its own life, the soul also begins to look with compassion at those who are still on earth. Dolores describes that many spirits discreetly accompany those they loved in life, sending thoughts of affection, intuition, strength. They don't interfere directly, but root for us. This form of loving presence is something that many feel without knowing. A thought that comforts, a memory that warms, a strength that arises in difficult moments. The soul, a year after death, no longer feels the need to be remembered or honored. It only wishes that those who remained can live well. The predominant emotion here is detached love, the one that doesn't demand return, but only wishes the other's well-being entirely. This love is what prepares the soul for the next step in its journey, whatever it may be. Dolores doesn't specify a single path, as each spirit is unique, but all move forward with more lightness, after crossing this first cycle with consciousness. It is at this point that the soul opens up to new possibilities, new ways to serve, new dimensions to explore. The emotion that drives this movement is hope, not earthly hope based on expectations, but a broader hope, which trusts in the flow of existence. The spirit launches itself into the new not out of necessity, but out of genuine desire to continue evolving. And in this disposition, the soul finds a new meaning, which is not limited to matter or time. Dolores Cannon always affirmed that the soul is eternal, and that this first year after death is only the beginning of a much larger process. She argued that human consciousness is capable of continuing to learn, expand, and transform infinitely. Death in this context is not a defeat, but a transition. For the elderly person who has passed, it is an opportunity to reunite with oneself without the limitations of the flesh, with more clarity and less noise. By understanding this, the spirit is freed from the fear of finitude and begins to fully live its new stage. And for those who are still here, this vision offers solace. Knowing that the soul continues, feels, grows, and loves, even after a year, helps us to live with more peace. If this content touched you in any way, share it with someone who may benefit from this message. And if you haven't subscribed yet, consider doing so now. Our goal is to continue bringing profound reflections with respect and clarity, so that each person, at any age, can look at life and death with more wisdom. The soul's journey doesn't end when the heart stops beating. On the contrary, it continues with more truth, more freedom, and more meaning. Dolores Cannon reminds us that there is always something beyond, something greater that guides us and welcomes us, and knowing this is, in itself, a relief for those who fear the end. May this understanding strengthen you today and in the days to come.